Again, good morning from the UK, and thank you for all joining us from different parts of the world, as I can see from the chat, and thank you for writing a few messages already. Um, like Edlin said, I'm Melius Michael. I am currently a credible specialist and a trainer for Pearson at Edexcel, but I'm also, that's part-time that's one side of my job. The other side is I'm a deputy head teacher at King Edward School here in Birmingham in the UK. So I've been involved with Pearson Edexcel since 2015, working with the new qualifications, supporting them in creating some new resources, doing some research for them, looking at specifically technology to help us deliver the qualification and access deeper understanding and making more links within the maths as well. Before we start, just to clarify again, this is an introductory presentation and a training session so if you are expecting any insights of recent assessments or papers, that's a different session altogether. And you can find those training sessions and you can find video calls from that on the qualifications website, which I'll direct you as well later on within the presentation. So as I said, this is an introductory presentation and training session in terms of understanding the qualification, how it's put together, the assessments, the assessment objectives, and then one of the crucial parts is ensuring that we understand how the examiners put together the papers, and so that we can be aware of them while we teach the qualification. Through that, I'll also explain the format, the structure of the International A level. Now, this is a two-module training course. The first one's more informative. There will be 3 activities throughout the session. The second one, though, it'll be a more interactive, as I would have gone through key knowledge and ideas about the A level in this session. So in the second one, we'll be looking more in terms of the assessment objectives, different style of questions, the mark schemes, exemplar student work, and then making sure we're aligning that, because one of the crucial things is also, as we correct our students through different assessments throughout the course of the 2 years when we teach this course, it's making sure that we are guiding them in the right way to maximize the marks. And that's something that we'll touch upon today, but we'll go into a lot more in the second session. Just to inform you from now, the second session is on Thursday this week, and it'll be at the same time as the session here. So if I now go back to today's session then, and I'll give you some of the key objectives that we aim to cover. So first of all, that was my welcome and introduction, as it says there. We'll be looking at how mathematical units are combined to make the A levels. Some teaching issues that have been shared with us over time. And again, it'll be nice. There'll be an opportunity to also discuss some of the views from you. Now, I've asked only for the chat because it's quite difficult to have the Q&A. So any questions that you have or any comments that you'd like to share at any point, please put them on the chat. I have that window on the side. I will try my best to go through that as well. Later on, when I ask for some feedback in terms of the 3 activities that we will go through, I'll ask Edlin to allow you to unmute as well. So if anyone prefers to just to share that by muting themselves and speaking instead of typing, that's also will be an opportunity. But please withhold just unmuting while I'm explaining anything within the presentation. But definitely, when I encourage you to share feedback, please feel free to choose either way. The other thing I'd mention, since I mentioned the 3 activities, I had requested for them to be sent prior to this, because in the past, some delegates from previous training sessions have asked if they could print them in advance. If you haven't, don't worry, but if you could download them, the link was shared at the start. And if Adeline, if you're able to just reshare that link as well that we transfer, so anyone who hasn't seen the email or didn't see that initial message, you could then download that. We'll need that. Thank you, Adeline. Adeline's just send you the WeTransfer link as well. So that's a Word document. There's a few things in there. The Word document that you'll need is this one here. So if you haven't, so I'll be referring to this Word document, which is on the screen right now, because within that there are 3 activities. The first 2 activities I'll share on the screen anyway, so there's nothing to worry about that. But the third activity that we'll go through has exemplar work from students that we'll do some marking together. So sorry to be saying that, but it's more about discussing and seeing how examiners. And we'll also notice that there's some discrepancies there, and you might agree or disagree with where they gave the marks, and then we can have a quick discussion on that at that point as well. And I'll also share as from my role as a school, so I'll give you some personal ideas of what I've done at the school. That doesn't mean that you have to do that, because as I said, I've got 2 roles, one as a Pearson specialist and then the other one as a deputy head teacher, and I was a head of maths before as well. So I can tell you we have a team of about 12 to 13 teachers. I say 13 because my head teacher is also a math teacher, and he does some lessons here and there with further maths. So it's again aligning our marking. So when we do assessments or mocks, we need to make sure we moderate them and standardize our marking as well. And that's because there's no point giving marks to students when they will lose them in the real exam. So we try to minimize where there's an opinion to then go back to this. And there's a task that you possibly could do yourselves before any mock, or a task that you could do with your teams at school, but also with your students. And we'll discuss that later on. So this here, as you can see from the screen, it's difficult to show you all 3 exemplars. So having the document in front of you, or if you have printed it, that'll be great. If you haven't managed to print, but you have the capability of printing, we will also look for the email for the second module, because then there's more activities there that you could have printed as well. If you have an interactive tablet, that's another way of joining and having that, so you can annotate on there as well. But like I said, I'll do my best to share the exemplars if you don't have access to that today. So that's a few of the things that I mentioned. The rest of it, I will talk about some support resources and offer the opportunity to ask some questions and see how we can help. I will be able to take some feedback back to the team as well, the maths team that builds resources for the international A level, that supports. So if there's any other type of training session specifically on the teaching of some of the modules as well, we're happy to take the feedback and then offer the respective training session to that as well. Some of them are already on there, but this is your opportunity to also share throughout the time, but I'll ask again at the end of the session. So that's our agenda. The aims of the objectives, I kind of touched upon them as well here, to get an understanding about how the qualification are devised, to understand the content of the qualification, which is, again, if you're new either to the international A level or if you're new to Edexcel, the Edexcel's specification, and structure. I'll be touching upon that to help you understand that. Has a few things to bear in mind as you plan for the course or your lessons, and that's based on experiences. So again, there's not one practice that fits all, but it's a few things to consider as you do that. To understand the assessment of the qualification, how to prepare students, to understand the support available, and of course, like I encouraged at the start, and some of you actually were sending this beforehand, it's a network as well where you can see what's happening in different locations and different, if you want to discuss together. So I'll give the opportunities for that as well. One thing that I noticed with this is no matter where we teach, yes, there's some difficulties which are based on location or schools, but when we're talking about strictly about the teaching of maths, there's a lot of common misconceptions that go across the world, and then therefore the way we deal with them or the way we teach it can support each other as well when we share ideas and talk about these. So again, it's an opportunity for a network and sharing of ideas. So without, but by the way, if anyone had joined me with the international GCSE, I will have some common information that I will have to touch upon within regards to the support and Pearson as I go through it. But please bear with me; it won't be too long It won't be many slides. So first of all, on behalf of Pearson, again, I'd like to welcome you all for joining us today on this international A-level course. A few things about Pearson. We're quite proud to be the UK's largest awarding organization. We've got a heritage that stretches back over 150 years. As you can see from that third point there, we're offering world-class global recognized qualifications to over 3.5 million students a year. And then we've got the 6,500 schools, colleges, and employers globally that we work with. We mark over 10 million exam scripts on behalf of the UK Department of Education, and we operate in 70 countries worldwide, which is also why your local Pearson representative will be important for you as well, as they can then address matters which are more relevant to your local community there. And then depending on the holidays, school holidays that you have, or the networks that you have there, and so it's important to have a good communication with them as well. Now, if we go into the International Maths A level, this next slide here, it just shows a few statements here. I'll leave you to have a quick glance over them. As you can see here, we have it refers to certain modules. Most of the modules are available in January and June and October. All the details are in the specification available on our website as well, and I'll refer to the website later on. So a few key things, including the email at the bottom right, which, and again, don't feel like you have to copy things from the slides. Make some annotations if you want to, or make some notes if you want to, but we will also be sharing the slides towards the end of this as well. So you'll get the slides from today's session. So, and any links on there, you'll be able to copy afterwards as well. On this slide here, we have 14 units that allow a variety of choices. Each unit is 1/6 of the A level and 1/3 of the AS level. Okay, so that's something to be aware of in terms of the Edexcel one. Then if we look at this next slide here, we have 4 pure units, which are all compulsory. And then we need 2 applied units. For larger centers, it allows basically for specialization. So if some of the teachers are specialized in the delivery of certain modules, they have a choice into a mechanics set, for example, or a statistics set. And by the way, all units are equally weighted, and the full course can be treated as a unitary one with all units taken at the end of the 2-year course, or it could be as a unitized course with, for example, P1 being taken in January of year 1 of a 2-year course. So you have that flexibility there with international A level still that we don't basically have in the normal A level in the UK. Here you can see, for example, a combination of what I was talking about as you do the different combinations here. And then if we look at the equivalent one onto the further maths, notice here different options that you can choose as you do the combinations. I'm not going to discuss more further maths in this session here because we're looking at the international A level, but it was worth just showing you quickly a few of the different options. Talking about the AS, if anyone's still interested in offering that to the students to actually cash in and obtain an AS. It consists of Pure 1 and Pure 2 and one of the applied courses, as it mentions on the screen there. And there are similar arrangements for AS Pure Mathematics and AS Further Mathematics. Now, you can find more information on the Edexcel website in regards to this. Now, the other thing you can find in your delegates folder when you download this is this document here, which I'll just make a reference now. I can bring this on our screens. There you go. So this PDF here, you can have it's the aggregation rules and guidance for the different A levels that we offer. And if you scroll down and go through this, it then explains the different options that modules that you can cache in together. And it's worth it reading because there's some rules that we need to follow as we choose them. It also gives you examples of how the marks are allocated from each one and the weight. So have a look at that. In terms of voice, or I've just seen a comment, or the share screen, depending on the internet connection, sometimes it goes off for seconds or not. If we have a bigger issue, Adeline, if you could just keep an eye. But yeah, sometimes the internet connection just causes that as well. So just keep in mind if it's an ongoing issue, it might be worth coming off and reloading, and we'll let you back in. Okay. That's if you were able to hear me. Sorry. So the other thing is, so once you understand how you can combine the different modules, the next thing is understanding and having a look at the sample assessments, which you can find on our website. There's a few past papers as well now, but having a look at that one there. The key papers, the sums, especially if you're starting we're starting a new course. The full set of past papers available after June 2019, although there are further specimen papers on the site as well. So that's a collection there that you can have a look at. In terms of once you understand them, in terms of using them for any assessments that you'd like, we are currently looking at shadow papers as well, where we change the numbers and it gives you, there's a lot more for the normal A-level maths, but people have requested for us to keep doing that for the international A-level as well as the exam wizard, which I'll come back to at the end of creating your own bespoke assessments. That can be handy. Some people prefer for formal mocks to use full papers, and this link here takes you to them because then you can look at grade bounds, especially if there were live papers before. So in this one here, it's also worth looking at the continuity from the GCSE as well. The fact that M1 assumes knowledge of P1, P2, and two-dimensional vectors, there's some implication there on how we structure the teaching of the unit in the first year of a 2-year course. So, sorry, as you choose the order that you want to teach the modules, you have to bear that in mind of what's required for each module and which modules have to. So there's some flexibility, but it's being aware of the requirements of each one as well. And if we look at, so as we look at the Pure 1 here, for example, there you can see some of the content which are outlined on the screen there for Pure 1. It's worth then looking at the other modules as well by going into, if you go into the specification and where they're all outlined, and then from there you can make the choices of how to do that. Some factors to consider when it comes to teaching, it's whether you will teach the full international A-level or whether you split that with other colleagues and you then do the applied, some do the pure, some do this pure split, some to teach the whole course. But if you have any split teaching like that, it's making sure that when they're ready to start, the prerequisites are covered already. Now, if I then look into, so we started from the structure of the modules, we've then looked at the options, we've mentioned about being aware of the requirements of each one. The next thing to consider is the requirements of the questions within that. The questions split between short and more lengthy questions, and then the marks are basically allocated accordingly. This is actually meant to be an inequality in the middle, where the 3 dots are. So, but this, for example, shows so that would have been an inequality where they first would have to solve and then define the actual regions that satisfy the inequality. And we put this on here as well because there are some issues to consider where students lose the marks even though it's a short type of question. And it's then talking about the working that they have to show to obtain those marks. And more of this, we'll touch upon this later on. A more lengthy question from the actual, from recent papers will be the next one here from mechanics. So here we have a longer question from mechanics 1 that you can see on the screen. We won't go through this at this point because we'll have the opportunity to go through the other questions in a few minutes. But as you can see, part A on that question there is 6 marks. And then we really need to see here a really good force diagram resolving vertically and horizontally, and using any associated maths with it as well to obtain those many marks. So it's again training them on not just to solve it, not just to do some working on the side, but actually how they present the work as well. And we'll touch upon that as we talk about the work. So talking about continuity, it's worth actually reflecting now on what you know about the international A level, comparing to GCSE, the international GCSE. So if you're offering the international GCSE from Edexcel, are you aware of what topics basically are brought over to the international level? What's the crossover between the two? And this leads us to the first activity here. So if you look at your delegates booklet, I'll put that on the screen here as well. It would be worth, if you have access to the specification or if you find that, to actually address it, but it could be just from your knowledge and experience so far, or or if you don't have much experience in international A level, what your expectations are. So I'm going to give about 5 minutes to this task. The booklet, if we go back to the booklet that I was showing earlier on, it's this first activity here. So on this response sheet here, you have of the pure 1 section from Edexcel. You need a copy of the international GCSE. It should be included. If it's not included, as I said, try to do that from your expectations or your experience. Use both copies to write down any topics on the response sheet which you feel would be completely new to students doing P1, or if it's a follow-up from that. So laws of indices for rational exponents, is that a yes or a no? Is that present in the international GCSE? No, you can make a comment, or you can share your comments afterwards on the chat as well. So I'll give you 5 minutes to have a think and reflect and see whether you believe, when you read that specification there, if the students would have had any exposure of this in the international GCSE, yes or no, and any comments optional to yourself. So 5 minutes from this. So on my time here is 9:29. So we reconvene again at 34 past, and then I'll get some feedback. If anyone wants to make any comments on the chat, I'll be watching this in the background, but please complete that. I will scroll this and have this finished. I'll have this on the screen, the first page at least, so that you can have a look if you don't have the sheet with you. So I'll give you a few more minutes here. Thank you. Till 35. I'll be in the background. So at this point, what I'll do, I will give you the yes or no based on what I have, and then I will then ask you to either unmute yourselves and give me any comments on how you feel about this, or if you have any questions regarding this, or you want to make any statements or any issues with any of these specification statements here. So any remarks that you'd like to make. So I'll put a yes or no so that you see if we agree. And then I'm happy for you to then give me some feedback for another minute or so through that chat. Okay, so we're talking about the international GCSE and laws of indices for all rational exponents. That is a yes, it's in there. So it's in the international GCSE. Use and manipulation of surds, also yes. Quadratic functions and their graphs, that's a yes. The discriminant of a quadratic function, that's a no. Completing the square solution of quadratic equations. That's a yes. Solve simultaneous equations, analytical solutions by substitution. That's a yes. Interpret the linear and quadratic inequalities graphically. It's a yes, but it's partly. And the reason for that, we've got the regions defined by linear inequalities in there. And that bit's in the GCSE. Represent linear and quadratic inequalities graphically. Again, that's a yes, but partly. Again, we've got those regions, like I mentioned, defined by linear inequalities. Solutions of linear and quadratic inequalities, that's yes, but again, partly. Sorry, that should be a Y. So the linear part of it is a yes. There's some easy quadratics on the GCSE, whereas they get a bit more complicated within the pure one. Algebraic manipulation of polynomials, including expanding brackets and collecting like terms factorization. That's a yes. So then if I move to, sorry, if I move this slightly, graphs of functions, sketching curves defined by simple equations, geometrical interpretation of algebraic solutions of equations, use of points of intersection of graphs to solve equations. That one is a yes, but partly. So I think someone mentioned in the chat as well that we build on towards, and that's what we're trying to do. So there's a reference a bit to that international GCSE, but we're building the knowledge and taking it further. The sketching part is the part that's not in the GCSE, and that'll be new to them. Knowledge of the effect of simple transformations on the graphs. So as it mentions there, that's a yes. Equations of a straight line, including the forms of, as you can see from the screen there, that's a yes, but again, that's partly. The reason I'm saying partly is because the international GCSE actually only requires the y equals mx plus c. But if anyone's teaching them more and addresses this as well, there's no harm, especially if you're preparing them for the international A level. But it's not in the specification. Conditions of two straight lines to be parallel or perpendicular to each other. That's a yes. The sine and cosine rules, including the ambiguous case of sine rule and the area of a triangle in the form of half AB sine C. And that's a yes, partly, and you might have already thought about that. That special case there, that's not within in the international GCSE. Radian measure, including use of the arc length and arc sector, that's a no. That's new to the pure one. Sine, cosine, and tangent functions, the graph symmetries and periodicity, that is a yes. The derivative of f of x as the gradient of the tangent to the graph y equals f of x at a point, the gradient of the tangent as a limit, interpretation as a rate of change, second order derivatives. That's a yes, but in the international A level, it's more sophisticated treatment. So the type of questions and what you're expected to do with it will be more complicated than the international GCSE. Then we have differentiation of x to the power of n and related sums, differences, and constant multiples. That is a yes, but again, it's partly. The reason for it's partly not the fractional and negative indices. That's something to be aware of that comes afterwards in a more complicated way as well. Applications of differentiation to gradients, tangents, and normals. Again, that's yes, partly. The key thing there is it's to do with the gradients, and the integration is a no because that's completely new to them in the international GCSE. Now, the reason why we made this task and we asked to do this task here is because when we came to put the specifications together, we actually did consider, or I would say the people that they considered how the flow would be, and therefore at the international A level to be a natural build towards the international GCSE. So there's a nice continuity between the two here. So some thought for that transition was made, and therefore any gaps that the students come with, you can refer back in the first term for them to go and revise or set some work from the international GCSE as a preparation towards the international A level. And then similarly, if we go back to the way that we said the modules work, some of the modules require some of these modules first, and that's that continuity that we mentioned. So being aware of it, so that when you're teaching and being aware of the common practices here, you can then know what your expectations should be, but also what to refer back to. And if you have the opportunity to teach a year 11, oh sorry, I say year 11 based on our context here, a GCSE group, then you can also be preparing them for the international A level so they can build the confidence towards it, and then stretch and challenge them as I go through. At this point, I don't know if anyone wants to make any comments or statements about what they thought as they were putting that together on the chat. I'll just give a minute or so. And again, if anyone wants to mute instead, you feel free to that. I'll just give a minute or so before we move on to the next bit of our session today. So I'll give a minute for any comments. Yes, so the radian one was partly the arc length and the area of the sector was, but not in the radian measure. So you're right to make a note of that one. Um, there are topics though. Be careful with the person who's written about Pure One automatically masters the international GCSE. There are topics, for example, that naturally fit in with mechanics or with statistics or some areas of the maths that are not you don't explore them as much more. They build the foundations towards it, but it's being careful that if you need to make sure that you expose them to all the different points of the international GCSE. But I think it's more being aware of when you're teaching the international GCSE, knowing what continues into the pure, and then stretching them a bit more in the GCSE will then support them with that. And vice and yes, I do think that in those topics that are crossover with the international A level, in my experience here in my school, is being aware of that. We then usually stretch them beyond the international GCSE to get them thinking, to get them prepared, but also because they then find the questions easier at GCSE level. And then when there's a few tweaks to that to make them even more problem solving, the more they've got the skills to do that. Someone said they have a question. Would you like to ask it now? Okay. 4.1. Sorry, let me just have a look at those again. The differentiation's been on the specification for the international GCSE for a few years now. I think what to be aware of that is the demand of the question will not be the same as the pure one. So there will be more straightforward questions, and they won't be expecting them to apply that into kind of more modeling style questions that the A level would do. And that will be the big difference with the GCSE and the A level. So there'll be more testing at the skills for that or having some basic questions on that. I'd recommend have a look at a past paper question either through or go onto the exam wizard and pull a question from that, and you'll see what I mean about the difference between that. But once I cover that, if I then stretch them to an A-level standard question, if I have really able students, they really appreciate it. And then they find that much more interesting, much more easier to access. But it's worth pulling a question and seeing it. The exam wizard is the easiest one. Thank you. So if we then look at the teaching of the international A level, so it's being aware of certain issues or obstacles we have. I mean, I am quite fortunate to work in the UK in schools that they've helped me invest in technology, whether that's more laptops, calculators, graphic calculators, and exploring different ways of accessing the maths in different ways, and then how we can help us stretch them. In other areas, though, it's not the same. They're less fortunate in this, so it's again It's finding different ways of doing this. But then there are, yeah, so there's a few factors to consider. The actual classroom layout, the way that we have the tables and the tasks. My personal opinion and view here is when I teach maths A level, I encourage a layout where I can do group work, not just pair work, group work, where they can discuss the different methods, different techniques, finding some open questions. Don't think that I'm talking about full investigation. We don't. I always feel the pressure of covering the content, but instead of giving them straight away or basically having at the front and giving them a question where we start discussing as a whole class. I like to have a kind of small groups discuss and then feedback to me, and then bring that, explore that. And I that's the one. But again, you don't all have to teach in that way. But it's considering the layout. The smart screens, that do people have classroom smart screens? In some parts of the world we would, in others it will be more challenging. But that changes again that the way that we will be teach, because we wouldn't just necessarily use the smart screen for a presentation. We have the interaction that Georgia brought, the moving things as well that you can see, observe, and make those links again. Access to the internet. In some parts, it's very, we're fortunate, in others less fortunate about this. And the reason why, because we have so many platforms online that we can access, and not just in terms of resources of PowerPoints, but also, like I mentioned before, graphing tools, other things again which are free for everyone to use, from Desmos to Autograph to GeorgeBra files to other things that can kind of, we can easily find ready-made resources which we can move things around as we ask the question, and ask a follow-up question for them to start thinking and giving us those answers. So again, but having access is a crucial thing for us to make those choices. What type of exercise books we use as well. Some use exercise books, some use notepads, some use just blank papers, some don't use at all. Some use actually iPads now, or tablets, for example, where they make everything on there. I've seen that as well. The other one is, assuming English is the language of instruction, how well do your students understand the spoken word of unwritten word? So again, it's being able to read the question, comprehend it, and then access the maths from it. So if that's a barrier as well, um, it's something to consider about how we train the students of keywords, of the more wordy ones, like the mechanics one we saw earlier on, being able to comprehend that they need to have access to that. So what support do we give in those kind of scenarios? Now, any of the examples I've mentioned or things to consider, I need to make sure you understand that this is not, there's no one Edexcel way. Those are, or an Edexcel view. That's just, so, those are things to consider. And then I'm giving you my personal opinion from my experiences, either myself or my teams that I've worked with so far. But are things to consider here. And then, of course, once you make your decisions, it's then finding those resources, like someone mentioned earlier on. And there's a plethora of resources. We're quite lucky in our subject that there are so many people that are sharing online of different things. And I'm happy to share and talk about some of the free ones that support this at the end of this first module. Now, some of the things I mentioned here, as for example, the next one as well, sometimes are for the heads of department to consider, but we can have a think about it as well. So how much prior learning can we assume? We looked at that previous activity there where we saw a crossover, but just because they've taught it in the international GCSE doesn't mean that they would remember it. Doesn't mean that they will, doesn't mean that they will, they have mastered it, like someone mentioned before. Looking at the different grades that they've received, and therefore, different gaps that they have. So it's how do we prepare our lessons for that? What textbooks should we use? I mentioned that earlier on. How often should you test the learning? So some people will test at the beginning and at the end, and then so that this is your baseline of each topic. Some of them at the end. And when I mention assessment, some prefer to be marking everything. Some utilize self and peer marking as well. Um, some is finding ways of receiving or feedback immediately so they can adapt their teaching. And some use the technology, like I mentioned, we're exploring on how to use, devices within the lesson, so I can give short quizzes and obtain an outlook of what my students are, I'm able to do, and from there adapt my teaching accordingly. Sometimes I even do, a quick quiz at the end of a lesson to prepare myself for the following lesson, especially when I have a new class. Um, so it's getting that information for us to be thinking and adapting. It's adapting the resources that we have based on the audience that we have in front of us. Um, and those are key things to consider. Looking at the other one here, organizational issues as well. How often should we set homework and how much? Some schools have a policy. Some are more flexible to the teacher. Some, for example, there's an expectation from parent carers that there is a very regular homework, and they wonder then if you don't expect it. And again, what type of homework is this? Is this a homework for them to consolidate the learning within your classroom and what you've taught, or is it something for them to explore so that it's ready for the next lesson, or is it something to challenge and stretch your students? Again, depends on the audience you have in front of you and what the purpose of that homework is. Some of times it's just very small pieces of work just for them to retain the information and get them to look back to the actual task so that when they come into the following lesson, depending as well, especially if there's a few days between each lesson, for them to at least put the effort to have a look at that. So it depends on the culture of your school and your class that you create. Your expectations is your class, your expectations. Yes, we all have to abide on certain expectations of a department and a school, but we can set our own expectations as well. When sharing a course between two teachers, how do we split the content? And does that work? Do we have to wait for another teacher who's teaching the pure to cover certain things because we've started the mechanics course too early, or by the time that we've started on timetable to start it, they haven't finished the topic that we want on differentiation or integration, for example, and that creates a barrier. Or if we start, so it's looking at all this, or in terms of the method that we teach. So when an applied teacher comes to then teach something that's relevant from pure because they need to apply that, if they choose a different approach, a different method, that confuses the students as well. So it's being able to communicate between us as teachers as well. Um, and on this case here, some other organizational, so some of the things I already touched upon here is sharing the first year of the course between two teachers. One possible model is this one. Teacher A goes through algebra, functions, coordinate geometry. Teacher B goes to trigonometry, differentiation, integration. In term 2, teacher A does mechanics 1, teacher B starts pure 2. Term 3, revision, pure 1, 2, and mechanics 1 past papers. So that's just one model. You don't have to just follow this model, but that's one model to go through some of this splitting between them. This leads us then to activity 2, which I can put on the screen again, where it's worth actually then exploring your views as well. The activity 2 asks you to consider the issues raised on the previous slides about the teaching. I would suggest look at each of the slides in turn and consider what other points you would have to think about when teaching the course. So again, you can use the chat to share some of this. I'm just going to see if I can put that on the screen as well. So if I put the delegates one so you can have a look at that if you don't have it with you in front of you now. So there's some of the things to consider. So can I make it slightly larger? There we go. So issues you have to consider when teaching. Some are culture specific, like I mentioned, the classroom layout. Do you have a smart screen? Do you have access to the internet? What type of exercise? That's what I mentioned in one of the slides. The content, how much prior knowledge, the textbooks you use, how often should you test learning? Should you write your own tests as well? Organizational issues, how often should you said homework. Does your school, college have an examination week, a specific mock week that you have to make sure you teach by that certain content? When sharing course between two teachers, how do you split the content? So here you can either make a note if you printed this, you can have a reflection, and on another paper just make a few things which are relevant to your school. And so let's have a look. If I give 2 minutes for you to reflect, or 2 or 3 minutes to reflect on these points here, and then I'll ask you to make a few comments on the chat. It'll be interesting for us to read and see the different ways that this is done across different schools, different countries as well. So off to you now for 2 or 3 minutes. I'll give another minute. If we could start, if you could perhaps share some of the points. How do you, what things have you had to consider within your context? Um, any of those points there in terms of issues that you need to consider while you prepare for this. Could be also the school holidays or the way that in your area it's worth knowing. And then if anyone wants to ask an opinion as well, we could also perhaps give you some suggestions as well if that's the case. Mhm. Exercise on the textbook. That's efficient. I find them as using with our team, we use those as a starting point of for teaching, and then from each one we then supplement them with other extension questions or activities that you can find free online from even if it's not necessarily for the international level, but the A level, but you can find it's relevant to it. From areas such as underground maths. If you haven't looked at that, have a look at underground maths as a free resource with a lot of nice open task activities. Desmos has created activities as well that you can do front of class. And I'm not suggesting you remove from this, but you can use them adjacent to this. Mr. Barton Maths and Dr. Frost have also got activities and things that you can display on the front. There's a GeorgeBra whole booklet that you can find on the Emporium as well with different things or animations with the graphs or even applied for the stats mechanics. Graphic calculators are allowed. All calculators that are numeric and not algebraic. So in other words, they won't simplify an algebraic term or give you an answer in terms of algebra, then are allowed. Um, In terms of someone asked, I think it's Leo asked about how much training do you suggest in, are we referring to the graphic calculators? Yeah, that's also, someone mentioned about the homework in terms of it varies depending on the difficulty and the student's ability. Um, And that's good if you have that flexibility within the school as a teacher to make the right choice for your students. That's the best scenario. Unfortunately, in some of the schools I worked, sometimes you have to put a homework for the sake of putting a homework, or sometimes you're not allowed to put as much as you want to, or because of the restrictions. And unfortunately, some schools have become like that. Um, I do agree using past paper questions. What would be nice as you get more experience in terms of past paper, if you have experience, is choosing the right question to put on the screen, getting them to solve it, but then having some variations of that question in mind and asking that what if this changed? What would change to the output, or what would change to this? And having them follow up questions so that as you know, if when you look at questions, every question, they have similar questions, there's a pattern there, but there's a small variation to it. So if you have the experience and the knowledge to do that, you can start asking the what if. Um, and that captivates some of our more able students, and then it boosts their problem solving as well. In terms of the graphic calculators, depending on the model you have, um, it will have different functions that your students could benefit from being able to use. We use them as the graphic calculators more for the teaching instead and less for the verifying because it's very easy to verify, but it's the easiest tool to just put in front of them and start exploring the graphs and then any transformations of this or an application of it in a modeling question. Um, there are, if you go on, depending on the models that you have, you go on the website. And I know, for example, Casio has a lot of free resources on there with ideas of teaching as well, and videos to watch to get some of the extra functions and tools I'm mentioning. But I'm sure other similar ones have the same. Nice. So someone mentioned that you have the digital classrooms and all students have Chromebooks. I mean, I'm trying to think about how we can make my school have one-to-one devices in the classroom because I just love the fact that they can take out and start exploring something, and then me getting that immediate feedback as well at any point. In terms of textbooks, I'll touch upon at the very end. It's very difficult for me to give you a true opinion when this is recorded, but perhaps, but perhaps I can. Yeah, I think all textbooks have something good and bad. It really depends on the sequence, and yeah, it really depends on the sequence that they have. If it's a nice flow, and if you agree with it, it really depends if the question, if it's actually supporting you. um, it also depends the textbook if the questions that they have allow creativity and not just standard box questions that you can have, or if they have the variation. Otherwise, you're going to have to go find other ones. And the biggest one is, do the questions in the textbooks that you use reach the level of difficulty of the real exams? Because what you want is the textbook to give you that option to go above and beyond that, because that's you want to be having giving your students more difficult, you want difficult, harder questions are what there will be in the exams. And if the textbook allows you to do that, because it offers that, then it's a nice book. The other thing is the explanation it gives. Some textbooks don't give an explanation, it's just just question, it's just random questions. But I also like variation, and I mentioned that in the international GC the other day. Some textbooks have been published recently, but also you can find workshops online where a student, if you're going to set some independent work, so you want a textbook that gives you guidance to what to teach with the class, and you want to be able to set some independent work to the student as well. And if you have different variations of difficulty of ability groups, you also want to have a textbook that helps them guide to make those connections. So that's a few things to consider as well, when you choose the book. Right, so I'm going to stop here, and we move on. But thank you for all the points here that you've mentioned in the chat. There's a lot more we can talk about. It's always unfortunate when we do this online. Well, there's the benefit that you've got different people around the world. From the downside is, I think the interaction when we have a group of people in front of us all passionate about maths. It's nicer when we get to discuss this, and always take something back with us as well. Which of course reading it from messages is not the same. Right, so if we go on to schemes of work, I mean, schemes of work, there's two ways of seeing this. Schemes of work are there to guide us to ensure that we cover the whole specification, and they can be tailored around the school weeks that we have and the school holidays, because they'll be slightly different between different areas around the world, but also and to guide us to make sure that we cover the whole content. But then also the downside to scheme of work is you feel the pressure that you have to cover it all within what it says, and therefore sometimes the students direct you in their own path. So it's there to be a guidance, but it shouldn't restrict you too much in terms of not being able to explore the maths with the students as well. Um, However, if we look at the positives only, it enables progression, like it says there, so that ideas are presented in the correct order. What we've done with a few schools before, and hopefully some of you have thought about this as well, is we start putting hyperlinks of different websites or different resources within our shared drives, so that different things that we shared and talk about maths, and oh, this is a great resource, we've tried this and it works. We'd put that in there, put a hyperlink on the right topic, so when we teach it again or reteach it, we don't forget that resource as well. It enables the course to be taught in a timely manner. And again, if you look at any schemes of work that Edexcel has created, the timings on there are only a suggestion. If you That's a suggestion on that. If you have really strong cohort, you would want to be doing less time on that, unless you want to build that time of stretching and challenge a lot. Or if you have a really weak cohort of students, then again you need to be aware that the depth that you go into will be probably less, because you need to cover all the content. So it's finding that balance accordingly. It enables cooperation between teachers if the course is shared, and it enables you testing to take place in a methodical way. So again, it's putting those assessments so everyone knows that they have to cover certain things by certain times. And here's for example an idea from the Edexcel scheme of work. Some teachers prefer to have their own schemes of work, but you can download it as a Word document and then take bits of it as you want. In general, you have teaching time for each topic, 4 hours, for example, for powers and certs. The prior knowledge of needed is mentioned, and then keywords. What we've done for the A-level maths, not international maths, we've also put using of technology. So you might want to download that and then take some of that use of technology and put that on here. We're currently discussing whether to do the same for here, but you could go on to the normal maths A-level, find the crossover topics, which is quite a lot, and then bring them forward over here. And then you can have those opportunities there as well. And then within that, then you have you have for each topic teaching objectives, teaching points, opportunities for reasoning and problem solving. And we'll come on to that a bit more as we talk about assessment objectives in a few minutes. And then common misconceptions. So we put the effort to put some of those misconceptions, especially for someone who's new at teaching, either in the profession or teaching the course here. So that's regarding the scheme of work here. What we'll do next now is we're going to look at the assessment objectives and talk a bit more about how we assess the international A level. Michael, you had a question. I can pause for him a second. Okay, maybe I'll come. Yes, so this the scheme of work. There's a scheme of work with all the information I mentioned. It's on the qualifications website and on the Maths Emporium. I'll show you the screen. I'll show you that later on at the end of the questions. And misconceptions. The technology, I'm not sure if we put that in yet on the international A level, but we have put it on the normal A level. But if you download that, a lot of the topics are crossover, so you can bring that across to this. But the misconceptions are there already. Now, one thing I should mention, because a lot of you were mentioning textbooks. The textbooks do not direct the exams. Okay, it's the specification that does. So even if it says endorsed by Pearson, Pearson is a publisher, Edexcel is the examining board. Those two are, even though they're kind of under the same roof, they're separate departments. And therefore the publishing here, yes, they take the specification and make books for that. And then I'm representing today the qualification side here. So any other books will do as well. But you need to make sure you refer to the specification on the website and ensure that you look and are aware of what points to address. That's the one that the examiners will use to create questions from. And that's the one that the teacher should be using to be covering all the content. So that's the common ground, that specification there. And that's important to remember that, because just following the textbook doesn't always mean that we are, covering everything. And you cannot be blaming the textbook for not helping you prepare your students for that. It's the specification that covers everything here. A few things to mention here. As you can see from the screen, you've got each unit is assessed through a 90-minute examination paper. The examination paper is constructed by a senior examining team, experienced examiners, most of whom are practicing or retired teachers, lecturers. The rules of constructing an examination paper are strict. Sufficient content must be present in each paper, or content must be examined over a period of papers. No content can be set which is not in the specification. The 5 assessment objectives must all be tested, and the demand of successive papers should be roughly the same. Now, the assessment objectives are related to the teaching objectives. Okay, they should be. We are going to describe them and go through them in more detail in module 2. so to better understand them. And those are, just to mention them for today, the ones you have on the screen here. So assessment objective 1 is to recall, select, and use knowledge of facts, concepts, and techniques. Objective 2 is to construct rigorous arguments and proofs. Objective 3 is to recall, select, and use knowledge of mathematical models. Objective 4, to comprehend translations of realistic context into mathematics. And Objective 5 is to use calculator technology and other permitted resources accurately. And as it says in the box on the top right, the marks are assigned to each assessment. Objectives are different in some of the units, and we're going to have a look at that in Module 2. So it's for you to understand on how it's split. And this is where I was talking at the beginning of the session, where I mentioned and having an understanding of how they put the papers together helps you then prepare your students as well. So if we then let's talk about the marking for now. So we need to, Edexcel ensures consistent marking. So the examination paper marking team consists of experienced, practicing, and retired teachers managed by team leaders who themselves are responsible to a senior examiner. To ensure fairness of marking, each examination script is scanned and electronically split so that each question is marked by different examiners. Marking takes place in private in the examiner's home. All marking is confidential, and each examiner must adhere to a detailed mark scheme. The marking is monitored and corrected if necessary by a senior examiner. The mark scheme they use has a bit more information than the ones released to the public, by the way. And just because a method's not referenced in the mark scheme that you have when you mark for yourselves, and I'm only mentioning this because you will probably be using mark schemes for assessments and mocks within your school. If a method's not used but is correct, then that should also be given full marks. It's when there's not sufficient working, that's an issue. And also where technology is used, like a graphic calculator, and the working isn't shown. And if the question now addresses and says, any use of that. So you'll see more and more of that coming up. Here's an example on the next slide that I'm going to display here of a question from the January 2023 Pure 2. Now, I mentioned that calculator technology. It's there to, if you look at the bottom there, solutions relying entirely on calculator technology are not acceptable. And that statement's there now to point out that if you're going to use a calculator to get the answers from there and then skip steps, you're not going to be given the marks. So that sentence there is now put more and more because as more people use graphic technology. And that's something to be aware of when you look at, and that's training your students as well. When I come to teach with the graphic technology, I always consider that, do I give them access to that from the start? If I want to explore the maths or investigate or introduce it, then I would. If I want them to build upon the knowledge, if I want them to get used to the algebraic method, I'll keep that away and then verify afterwards. And then when I come to do tests and assessments and homework pieces, I'll make sure that if I expect the working, I train them before that. In one of the case studies I've done with graphic technology, I noticed some of my most able students were losing marks because even though I said 100 times to them, make sure you show your working, they just copied answers from them, put them on there as well. Whereas below average students seem to be benefiting and boosting their confidence for different various reasons. My more able students seem to be losing out, and that's something we did a bit of a trial with them, and then we noticed that, and we had to work with that as well. So be aware of that and show them those sentences so that they're well prepared before that. If we look at the mark scheme for this, you will notice different types of marks there. You have the M marks, the B marks, the DM marks as well. So, and again, the DM mark there where you see it's dependent on the first method mark to be given. If the first method mark is not given, then that one says, so it's dependent on that one being shown as well. Now, it's So it's being aware and showing them and working with your students in terms of this one. Now, in terms of marking, it'll be interesting to see if we all know how to mark, if we're all not know how to mark, if we're consistent in our marking, which leads us to our activity 3. And this is the one I was talking about at the start, where it's better if you have the Word document either printed or at least have the Word document to be able to see, because it's hard to show you all of this. So if we go to our delegates booklets now, and use the mark scheme provided to mark 2 student responses to question 3. What I would advise here is, if perhaps if you haven't seen that question, maybe actually solve it yourselves first to see the model answer and what to expect your students. And then mark it, and then leave the chat for now. I'll tell you when to give me some feedback from that. So if I bring back the delegates booklet again, it's this one here. If we scroll down, here are the two student responses to questions 3. Use the attached mark scheme. So if I put the question 3 back on here, there's your question 3. If I would recommend, if you haven't done that question before, I'll remove this in a second. Perhaps answer it first. Then please note that M marks are correct methods, means that the mark cannot be awarded unless the previous mark was awarded, and the A mark is only awarded if the corresponding M mark has. So there's response A for part A and part B. And then there's response B, a second student, part A and part B. And there's the mark scheme there with the notes. Okay, so I would suggest, and on the record sheet here, if you record how many marks you would give for student A, B, student B, A, B. So those are the marks to give. You can, if you have it printed, annotate next to the work instead, or if you don't have it printed, you could perhaps just write it on a draft paper or somewhere there so that you can then share with us and we can go over it. So here's I will put the question back on the screen here. As I said, to allow you time to then solve and to see that, I will give you about 10 minutes for this. 1, to read, solve the question. 2, to then see if you can put the marks that you think this is, and then we'll come back and talk. So let's say about 10 marks, 10 minutes for the whole task. So say for me, it's 19 past. We'll reconvene about 29 past, and then I'll share that and talk about this. So I'll be in the background looking at the chat if you have any questions, but I'll be silent, please. So I'll make a note again in the chat for this. So I'll give you that chance to do that. Speak. I'll be in here. Adeline, can I just okay. So does that mean everyone should be back here now? Yeah, because it's all close. Okay, so if you manage to do that task within the breakout rooms, thank you. If they had technical issues, I'm sorry about that. I just found that easier with that last time. So if we look at response A, which is on the screen there, do you want to put on the central chat here what any kind of marks that you think? So based on that answer there, how many marks should they get? Would they get all 4 marks, or will they get 2 or 1 or none? What would you suggest? Anyone would like to share on the group chat here on the chat facility? I'll give them another second here in case anyone's typing. Based on this student's work here that we can see, what did you guys give to that student? I'm not sure if there's a delay here, or but okay. So if I tell you here, so the response A for part A would have actually got they've shown the method and all required terms are correct. So therefore they will get all 4 marks. They'll get the M1, a B1, a A1, and an A1. Yep, thank you. The second part here, thank you. The second one here, out of 3 marks, the student A, they would actually receive the 2 method marks. but k equals to 0 must be rejected as an answer, as it contradicts the statement in line 1 of the question. So they would lose 1 mark. So it's the second one part here. They need to reject this one for them to be able to get all 3 marks as well. If we go on to the second student here with all this work that they've displayed. So they end up with some part A's at the top here. Student one, so second student here, they would get a method mark and 1 accuracy mark. So they've shown the method's shown, but the second term not fully simplified, which is why they get the 0B marks. The binomial coefficients for the third and the fourth term are simplified, which is why they get the accuracy mark. But then the coefficients have not been fully simplified, which is why they lose the other accuracy mark. So you can see here, if you understand how they allocate the marks, we can ensure that we train our students to do the same. And we'll look into that more into module 2 as well, where we do a bit more, we're checking our marking and how it's and understanding how that all comes together with the objectives. I'm looking at part B. So, here, they have the correct equation, but then incorrectly simplified. There's an error of method, not a numerical error. So they will then get only the first method mark. They will lose the second method mark, and they would also lose the accuracy mark for that as well, as the values of k are not correct. So that's how they were given. You can also see that on the screen now, what I've just explained, if you didn't catch what I said. And then I'll make a reference to how the final marks are awarded in a grade. The final grade is awarded as well. So and we'll do more of how this is allocated and the reasons for how the marks are given in the second module as well, because like I said, if we understand how the examiners mark, we can then address that within our teaching to maximize the marks. So arriving at a final grade, the raw marks for each of the 6 units is converted to a mark of the uniform mark scale. That's what we mean by UMS. The purpose of the UMS is to take into account the relative difficulty of each unit as evidenced by the distribution of raw marks on that unit. So, and that's why that's how they use them, to make sure that the difficulty year on year or entry of the exams are similar. So a difficulty paper, say paper 1, may have a grade A boundary of 56 marks, whereas an earlier one, say paper 3, may have the grade A boundary at 60 marks. A student who got 56 on paper 1 and 60 on paper 3 would have the same UMS on each paper. The final grade is found by adding 6 UMS. So grade A is 480 out of the possible 600 marks. And that's how they work with the UMS marks as well, and the reason for it. The final thing I'm going to do, because I want to stop a bit earlier to ask any other questions that you might have had throughout the session, is just reminding you of the support that Pearson offers and some further support they have. So similar to anyone who was in the international GCSE, they structure the support they give in those in this table here. Some is to do with a getting started guide. There's training events. Some are local and in person. And if you want to request some as well, some in-person training, you can either talk to your local Pearson representative, or you can email the teaching team and request that. And sometimes we fly out as well into different areas and offer some training. Some of them we can offer online so that different people can have this benefits and drawbacks for each of style of training. And if there's anything to do with moderation, with marking, or even the teaching of specific modules of the international A level, that's also can support. Sorry earlier that you missed that. The slides will show you how the marks were actually given. We'll be sending them out in a few minutes. There's also advisory support, community forums, schemes of work, skills mapping, sample assessment materials, examiners reports, exemplar mark responses, past papers, the exam wizard, results plus. If you haven't utilized it before, it's a great tool that only Pearson Edexcel offers, and access to scripts where you can actually see the marks. And I'll touch upon that next module as well, because there's some work we could do with the access to scripts. So I'll mention that in the next module. However, when I one benefit of having this is the network, as well as the in-person networks that Pearson supports, or when we bring together. Because as I was new to the qualifications, back in 2015, or we changed the qualifications here, I found a lot of advice, resources, and ideas, and also things to take back to my school and share with my department through network meetings, such as this one here. But it was much more handy in person. So whenever there's some possible opportunity like this, I would really I recommend it. I greatly I recommend that, because we can support each other with this as well. In terms of the qualification website, it's like the one I mentioned here. There's a lot of resources on there. And I thank you for someone else who shared their own link as well. There are individual links as well, but I would also always recommend start from the actual qualification website. The specification and sample assessment materials is on there. There's exam materials, documents including past papers, marks, examiners' reports, which I'll address next time. There's forms and administration documents that you can find on there. Teaching and learning materials for more exemplars, and exemplars are great because it's like this one where you look at students' work, and then there's some advice at the bottom of how to use them. The other one that I mentioned earlier is the Results Plus. That's a free online tool as well, where you can get insights of your students' performance in terms of topics, what areas they've done really well, what areas they need to develop, and then you can reflect on the practice and the methods of the approach, or even the time of the year that you taught certain topics, and then reconsider them if you want to build upon them, or find other resources or other ideas, or request a training session upon that one. So those are a few key things that you can take from that. It's quite useful to have. The information goes on Results Plus in the following. So students take the exams, exam papers are scanned, examiners mark the papers, and the performance reports are then shared to you through the Results Plus as well. So, and then you can look at that as a department as well, or as a classroom, or individual students as well. Then the exam wizard, a few of you mentioned this already. You can create your bespoke assessments, worksheets for homework, mock exams. You can access to some data as well on this. So it's a good free tool to use to then support you with that. I did mention also the access to script. This one here, that means that as long as you've got consent from your students, you can look at their actual papers. You won't see any annotations on there. You'll only see, or any ticks or crosses from the examiners, but you'll see the marks that were allocated for each one. This can be a nice tool for you, for you to see how a certain student achieved the marks. If they're very close to the next grade, then scan through and see, do you agree with the marking? You also be able to do a practice, similar to what we've done there. Hide the marks, mark it yourselves, make sure that you are aligned to the way that the examiners would mark. But also it could be that you take some top, middle, and low students from your class, hide the names, and then use it as a future way of getting the students to mark themselves, like we've just done now, and then understand the difference of how they can achieve the marks, and therefore do better in the following cohort can do better than the previous one. There are paid resources as well. You've got the active books as well online. You've got the student books that some of you have mentioned. So you don't have to buy these in order to deliver the course, but they're there for you to have. Some of the published resources, and again, it doesn't mean that you have to have this one. There's other publishers who also publish books for this. Is this one here? There's a link to this one as well. It supports a modular approach in line with the latest specification, which is recognized by universities worldwide. Exam practice provides opportunity to access understanding and progress, so students can make the best progress they can. Appropriate international content puts learning in a real-world context in this book. And then the embedded transferable skills needed for progression to higher education and employment, they kind of are signposted throughout the book as well. It is accompanied by online teaching resources that contains materials such as lesson plans, assessments, and mark schemes. But like I said, you don't have to go with this specific textbook. There's other textbooks that you can find in the publishers that you can use. Within our team, the maths team, so I'm a person who's not full-time in Pearson. As I said to you, I am a teacher of maths A level and GCSE, but also a deputy teacher, a deputy head teacher at a school. But you've got people like Mark Heslop who works full-time. He was a teacher, works full-time in the maths team for Pearson, who can then support you as well. You can email him through the email there that you have, or the contact us, or you can even call in and request it as well. So he's a dedicated subject partner, happy to answer questions. And then feel free to, as I said, to use that tool there. There'll be others behind it, and they can then recommend to people like me, depending on what the areas are. On that note, I'm going to stop and pass it back to you for any questions. If you do not have any questions at this point, we'll finish. You're okay to go if you don't have it, or you don't want to stay behind and listen to any of the questions others have. If you want to hang around and listen to others, and you might then pose a question, I'll be here in the background for a few minutes. Use the chat or unmute yourselves and I'll answer any questions I can. We will have the module 2 where we look at more the assessment objectives, more into the marking, more into the exemplars, like I said before. And that's on Thursday, the same time. So if you have no questions, I hope you have a good rest of the day. Otherwise, I'll be here in the background to ask any questions for a few minutes. So thank you again for joining us today. And I'll see you hopefully on Thursday.